And we're live for episode 159 of Trek Live. How you doing this morning, Dan?
Doing great. Excited to be back talking about Star Trek.
Yeah, we were off last week. Took a little break. Um, really excited for the topics that we have kind of charted out for the rest of March.
Yeah.
Starting this week with talking about continuity in Star Trek. Kind of a general. Not really sure where we're even going to go with it. I have some ideas in mind, like things I'm curious to talk about, but not as we are wont to do. It's not like a super structured, like planned out topic. It's a general starting point, and I'm eager to look at like how the different shows used it within their own like confines, like continuity within the series, continuity of the entire universe, because I feel like those are two different things.
Oh
yeah. Especially the later you get in the series, like the more recent stuff, and even like the later Berman stuff, when there's more universe continuity to play with. So we'll talk about that. But like we always do, let's check in with each other's rewatches.
Let's do it.
Where are you in season 4 of Deep Space Nine?
So, if you guys remember correctly, I believe the last episode that I watched was Our Man Bashir, which is episode 9 of the 4th season. Over this 2-week span, I had watched Homefront, Paradise Lost, Crossfire, Return to Grace, trying to stick to that 2 to 3 episodes a week. The middle of season 4 of Deep Space Nine, it started off really strong. Season 4 started off really strong. It just keeps carrying the momentum. There hasn't been a bad episode in a good long while. I feel like even episodes that I came across that I had no idea what I kind of knew what I was getting myself into in the back end of this, but Homefront and Paradise Lost, I didn't remember much, so it was nice to see that with fresh eyes. Great political take on some great stuff that happens. And then Crossfire and Return to Grace, to me, are 2 solid episodes in themselves, so I think not much to complain about here.
Yeah. No, I would agree. That's a good run. Homefront and Paradise Lost is a really big deal, I think. Important 2-parter. Really key look at paranoia when leadership and government operates from a place of fear. How easily you kind of go down a dark road.
Big time.
Really, really strong stuff. Great Sisko character development with his dad.
Oh, big
and, like,
time. The
Sisko
restaurant.
family. Yeah. They really the homebound, Earth-based stuff there is really strong. I think some good guest stars. Odo's got some great stuff to do.
Yeah.
Really, really highlight Deep Space Nine, and so specifically Deep Space Nine. Like Deep Space Nine would tell that story. Like that's so their vibe and so consistent with the premise of that show and the kinds of things that show wants to talk about. The darker side of Star Trek and the cost of having this bright new future, like that it's not always perfect, and the struggles that you have to like overcome to maintain that. Ben Sisko and this crew doesn't come along to like straighten Starfleet out. How quickly could that have spiraled into a longer running problem? So I love those 2. Crossfire, I was kind of talking to you off air last night about that being like a classic example of an episode that I was not into when I was younger, as a teenager, as a kid, but as an adult who's had some life experiences and seen friends do things, and just real world stuff informs a lot of my change of heart with that episode. I think it's really good and a good rock solid like just adult drama about real life crap that people deal with. And I think that's a pretty quiet, understated, and like you talk about the Star Trek Swiss Army knife, think about like the big picture continuity kinds of things that Homefront and Paradise Lost are doing with like establishing more things that are going to come with Deep Space Nine stuff. And then Crossfire is like such this little teeny, quiet, intimate character drama. The yin and yang of back to back, this huge 2-parter, and then this little teeny thing that seems so insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but
Yeah.
does some big things for important characters.
Mhm.
So that's the beauty of Deep Space Nine, I think, is that it can do both of those things so well.
Yeah, for sure. How's our rewatch going?
It's going. I finished TNG. That's
Congrats.
behind me. You can find. Thank you. You can find on our Discord server if you're a member, or if you'd like to become a member, and on Twitter I posted it as well. Full episode ranks and letter grades and all that good stuff. So that's behind me. Of course, we've talked ad nauseum. I think you could probably go back into our archive and find whole episodes on All Good Things. I feel like we did some pretty in-depth conversations about All Good Things. It's an unbelievable classic. It holds up really, really well. Every time I watch it, I think it's just a tremendous achievement. As a finale that has to feel final for the show, but because there's a movie literally around the corner that's already written, they can't shake up the dynamic too much. Like, it has to be self-contained. It has to end at a point where you can kind of go off and do anything. Unlike what many of the other shows, all the other shows except for the original series, really have done, where they when they final, they put a button on it. Like, there are things they shake up the dynamic at the end of the show. So to have to walk that tightrope, I think, had to be there's a high difficulty level there, and I think they pulled it off really beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick Stewart is, at his absolute best, I think, in that.
Stud as usual.
It's just a great episode, and a great finale. But season 2, I remember you talking about wrapping up really strong. I totally echo that late run of like the Maquis or Blood Oath through the end with things like Collaborator and Crossfire or Crossover and The Wire. Maquis, the Jem'Hadar at the end. Just really strong stuff. And in season 2, I feel like when I watch season 2 Deep Space Nine, it starts really well. I think it has that opening 3-parter, and like Necessary Evil's kind of in the front end. Cardassians is in the front end. I really like that episode. There's some good stuff at the beginning. Kind of middling in the middle there, like kind of dips into a little
some growing pains for sure. Yeah.
So, similar in what I think Enterprise kind of does in its second season. It starts strong. It has this period in the middle where there's just a lot of kind of average stuff, not a lot of real standouts, and the stuff that is stronger in that run is even that I feel like is kind of just okay, but feels stronger because it's surrounded by so much real middle of the road stuff, and then you get to the end and it really starts to hum a little bit. There's a consistent run of hits there to kind of wrap up the season, and I definitely see a common pattern with the way I react to Enterprise and Deep Space Nine's second seasons. And I'm into season 3 now. This weekend I've watched The Search, parts 1 and 2, The House of Quark, and Equilibrium. And it's a good little run. Equilibrium I have mixed feelings about. It's fascinating to watch it now. As I was watching it, it really, because of the Discovery season 3 stuff with Forget Me Not, there's like some additional importance, I feel like, there. And it is a really big deal for Dax, and establishing more backstory and more real life stuff for the Trill society. You get to see those caves and what it's all about, and the Trill home world and all that stuff. But I couldn't help. In my opinion, I know a lot of people out there would disagree with this. People who maybe aren't so big on Discovery. I think Forget Me Not is a far superior episode if you're just looking at those 2 episodes back to back. Like the 2 trips to the Trill home world. I think Forget Me Not's a much more interesting, exciting hour of Star Trek than Equilibrium, which I think is a little sleepy at times. It's good. I mean, I think it's perfectly fine. It's inoffensive. There's nothing inherently bad about it, in my opinion. It's not a misfire, but I think it's
more middle of the road.
Yeah.
I do love House of Quark though, because it's one of those ones where it's like, really great. Is it a comedy? What is it? I think it's a great pairing to pair Ferengi with Klingons. I think it's just a great, just fun hour that I really do love.
Yeah, the extreme polar opposites of Klingon culture and Ferengi culture, like watching Klingons get upset at Quark pushing like ledgers and financial records to like explain away the problem and try to solve the problem, and just seeing like that reaction
instead of just fighting it out,
all, trying to read these is really great. And I think it's a big moment for Quark to like show courage and like stand up to that Klingon guy, and I think it's one of Quark's best episodes. I really do. I mean, I think we were talking about this off air too. Quark, I think, is a really great character. One of my favorites because he's complicated. He's real. Like there's recognizable human qualities that are contemporary, things that we deal with. They're very real in our world that are really embodied in Quark. But I think a lot of the episodes that really are driven by Quark are inconsistent. I think a lot of the Ferengi episodes are
kind of
a mixed bag.
Dr. Crusher-esque type of. She's got great moments, right? But seldom do we see a standalone episode where it's
really great.
Really great.
Yes, there are some misfires in that run of character-centric episodes, but Quark has a ton of great moments and has great B stories and great standalone little scenes and episodes that aren't necessarily his focus. Mm-hmm. And he's got some great episodes. Little Green Men, which I know you recently watched, and I think House of Quark is another one that really does some great things for his character and makes him such an attractive character for the run of the show, even when he's not the focus.
Yeah.
So definitely a big fan of House of Quark. And Search, real quick, I'll just say I think it's good. I don't love it as much as many other Star Trek two-parters. I think part one's really strong. There's some exciting action with the rollout of the Defiant and that first big action sequence when they're, trying to covertly find the Dominion and they get found and they get blown away, basically. There's some, and Odo's got some really, deep character stuff that's really going to set him up for the rest of the show, obviously, there. But I think part two gets, is important. It's certainly high on the importance scale. I think if we're doing like see it or skip it in the way that you do it, talking about what's important and what's not, the Search part 2 is clearly really important. It's really driving home Odo's relationship with his people and what this whole dynamic's going to be, what the Dominion are going to be like now that we're actually talking to the Dominion. But I've never been in love with the twist at the end of that episode. And even a lot of the scenes on the Founder's planet, I think, aren't the most dynamic or exciting. But like the dialogue between Odo and the female shapeshifter in that episode, I don't think are as compelling as I wish they were. Mm-hmm. So it's good. It's important. It's certainly essential. Deep Space Nine, but I wouldn't call it my favorite.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think you're right. It does fall into my see it category, but I think if I look at other two-parters, I would prefer other two-parters far and above these ones, just because, again, that twist at the end for me is probably the one that brings it down. But
yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
the two-parter you just watched is far superior, I think.
Which is technically not a two-parter, which I got some flack on Twitter for because I yeah.
I hear you. Yeah, no, it is. It's one of those. Deep Space Nine does a ton of that they don't use the part one, part two, but there's to be continued at the end. So, yeah, there's an argument to be made. Enterprise does it too later on.
Yeah, it plays into the continuity of the show.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
exactly.
With that,
real quick before we.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I was just going to say, before we transition completely into the topic, Cyber Honey and Ian are in the room. Good morning to you both. Ian, I know it's good afternoon to you. Cyber Honey says I rewatched season 3 of Discovery. I'm jealous. Okay. I also want to do that. I'm constantly fighting the urge at this
Trying
time.
To keep Bill at bay.
To make that move myself. Because it started to show Star Trek continuity. I also watched the Nathan Allen Sarek, which are two examples of continuity from The Next Generation for sure.
Big time.
And she also mentions Quark grew to love over time, particularly in season 2, Profit and Loss, Rules of Acquisition. I don't know why, but I enjoyed his romantic storylines. Interesting. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So let's get into it with Star Trek continuity. And, it's kind of like, I think it's one of the qualities that kind of makes Star Trek a unique animal because of the fact that it's so big. There's so much of it, and there are these various series that take place at like different points along the timeline, and the things that happen in series A may affect series B or C or D. That's kind of like an inherent quality that is a foundational element of Star Trek, that it has this like world building emphasis. And I think it's been there since kind of the beginning. I think the first step in my mind to like establishing that this was going to be a territory that Star Trek was going to play in was the Menagerie with the original series. That it took the time to like establish that this is a ship with lineage, and there was a captain before Kirk and a crew before Kirk, and some of the people on the ship may have been around on this other crew, like Spock, and had experiences predating all these other people, and that there's a history here, and that there are things that happened before. It's not just completely self-isolated. This is like an anthology hour, and with no consequence for things that come later. TOS is certainly an extremely episodic show by its nature, and because of the time it came from. Like, it wasn't as serialized. The serialized television was not a thing on primetime TV in the 1960s, really, as far as I know. So it's certainly not that, but I think the Menagerie was the first sort of nail in the board that would say, this is a show that's going to deal with, a lineage of stories and characters that run over time.
Yeah.
So it's been there since 1966, I think. Yeah. I think it's why it's become such a big identifying element of Trek.
And to go to maybe a bigger kind of just a comment before, I think science fiction in itself has this inherent quality of keeping continuity, right? If we think of like other science fiction stories, continuity is definitely in the forefront. So I think, yes, I think Star Trek was definitely definitely broke ground, definitely in the TV side of things too. But I think even sci-fi in general is continuity is big, and just and things like that. So yeah, I think I definitely echo the TOS. It definitely started. It started down the path. We think about Space Seed, and then we get into the Wrath of Khan and things like that. Right. So it definitely, from the very beginning, continuity was like, okay, this is going to be a pillar, a staple of this kind of series. So yeah,
Khan into Star Trek 2 from Space Seed, and the clear like sequelness of that. That Kirk decides to leave Khan on this barren wasteland of, well, actually, it wasn't a barren wasteland
City
at the
Alpha.
time. City Alpha was originally a planet with some potential and natural disaster. Yeah. And that's where all the Wrath of Khan stuff comes from. But Kirk leaving him behind, and the consequence of that decision coming back to haunt him in the Wrath of Khan is clear continuity. And that, I think that's another early example. But I think an underrated one that maybe doesn't get as much pub is, I think the Star Trek movies in general, Star Trek 3 and beyond, Star Trek 6, I think his like relationship with the Klingons even is like a piece of, I think his bitterness with, like, obviously in Star Trek 6, he's dealing with overcoming his own prejudice and his own experiences with Klingons, and a lot of that's driven by David, his son, in Star Trek 3 and all that. But I think I read into it that it's even more than just that. There was a lot of bitterness before that. I mean, he's
even in the original series,
in the there's episodes like Errand of Mercy and Day of Dove, he's got these issues with Klingons that are really like difficult adversaries. There's bad blood there, like legitimate bad blood that goes back generations and years into the earlier part of his career. So I think the movies, more so than the series, outside of like the Menagerie and there are some little tiny references, like Spock says things in episodes like By Any Other Name, he'll reference something he did in A Taste of Armageddon. Like, there's little things that are thrown out there, like pieces of continuity. But once you get into the movies, there's a little bit there if you look for it. Obviously within the movies themselves, 2, 3, 4 is certainly a kind of a mini series, and 6 even it harkens back to things that happened in 2, 3, 4. But I look at the Kirk relationship with Klingons as a thing that even kind of starts with the original series. It's headcanon, partially, for sure, which is a whole other thing. What's headcanon and what's real canon, or continuity. But these are kinds of elements that I think kind of establish this running theme of continuity throughout the franchise.
Well, it's tough because there's big continuity elements, but there's also small, minute things as well. So that's a great point. I think that there are some continuity elements that carry over to, like the Klingon, like our relationship with the Klingons, right? Where they were dealing with that in TOS, and all the way up to Deep Space Nine, they're still dealing with the Klingons and stuff like that. So I think you're definitely right there.
E.R. Mixon's Craziest Theories actually just starts out a really good one. Another one that kind of links movies with the original series. The biggest continuity thing in TOS was the ship's discovery of slingshot time travel, and that is true. And Tomorrow's Yesterday, the whole way that they get back to the 23rd century from the Earth was slingshotting around the sun, and that's the mechanism that they use in Star Trek 4 to go back in time and to come back forward in time. So great call. I did not think of that, and that is 100% a piece of like pulling from the canon, the continuity to create this theme of like togetherness that I think makes Star Trek such an attractive thing for people who like that world building. I want to live in this place, in this universe. Quality. So great call, and welcome.
Yeah.
As well.
But the tough thing is I'm guessing there was some pushback because they couldn't go too far into the continuity where you had to watch the previous episode to watch this one. So I think there was definitely some pushback of not to do it too much, but also I think that's what makes Star Trek so timeless is that the continuity elements like that. Yeah.
No, it's always a fine line to walk. I think, I'm sure even now, with current stuff, the challenge is always like how much of it can we use, and how much at what point does it become detrimental? Like at what point are we turning people away because it's just too much to absorb? And if you're not, somebody who's lived in this and knows it kind of like back of their hand and has quick recall of things that happened across these shows, if you don't have that, you're kind of fishing without a net. That is always going to be the challenge. And I think like the TOS movies and like the beauty of I think Star Trek 2 is the way it's written, the way it's presented. I think it certainly helps to have seen Space Seed. Like it's a cool thing to have in the back of your mind. But I think it even kind of works if you sat somebody down to watch Star Trek 2: The Wrath of Khan
easily
without Space Seed. I think
or any Star Trek in general.
Yeah, you don't need it. I think it works, especially Star Trek 2. I think Khan's monologue on Ceti Alpha to Chekhov tells you all you need to know about the anger and the exposition about why he's so angry, and why what's about to happen is going to happen, and that's the fine line. You can't cut off your nose to spite your face. You can't have it be such a driving force that you need it, but if it enhances for the people who have it, that's.
Is there elements that in Star Trek where you find that the continuity is too much? Is there stuff in Deep Space Nine that's too much, too connected that you have to watch it? Is there stuff in season 3 of Enterprise where, hey, you need to see this before you watch this? Is there stuff like that in Star Trek, you think?
I think it's really hard to jump into. I would imagine that it would be really hard to get the full effect of season 3 of Enterprise by kind of jumping in at like episode 10 or episode 14 and just kind of running with it. You're going to be playing a lot of catch up, and you're operating without a lot of context. I think Deep Space Nine, kind of the same deal. You plop in the middle of season 6, it's probably going to be an uphill battle to appreciate it for it's to its full potential. And I think Discovery, even some of it, with it being so like Burnham's character being so identified as this member of the Sarek Spock family. Like if you walk into Discovery without any knowledge of the original series, especially, I don't know. Like that's an interesting. I haven't really talked to anybody who has experienced it that way.
Like that to try to think about that in a different way, because I think you're right. I think there are some, but the thing is though, I feel like there are some fans out there that do jump around like this. They may have seen it when it was first run, and they caught an episode here or there. So I think it definitely happens. I just wanted to ask you. Kind of moving on. Which series does continuity the best, and which does continuity the worst? And maybe we can. This is kind of intro into talking about continuity in each specific series. Like we kind of touched on TOS. We can talk about TOS
Sure.
too, but
Yeah. TOS, I'm very comfortable kind of like leaving where it is and leaving it with what we just talked about. Because
Okay.
There's not a whole lot there. I think what we talked about is kind of what there is. Unless somebody in the chat's got like another example, like Nixon's Crazy Theories had something else that is a cool reference. But I think the one that handles it the best and is the most comfortable with it is Deep Space Nine. I think they walk the best. I think they have the strongest balance of kind of a mix. If like I kind of just said, if you look at like season 6 of Deep Space Nine, I think it's got a really nice balance of there are elements in the story that are clearly serialized, and it really would help to be in it and in the continuity and aware of the Dominion stuff and all the baked in character long running arcs and things like that. But there are episodes that are more traditionally one off, many of them. And I think of like Statistical Probabilities and The Magnificent Ferengi and like these are standalone stories. These are not like completely arc based. You need the last episode to function at all in the next. There are many standalone stories.
Mm-hmm.
But Deep Space Nine, by its nature of having to stay in one place and having things come to them and are left with things, as opposed to we solve this problem to the best of our ability and warp off and find the next one.
Yeah.
That many of the other shows are inherently designed to do.
Yeah.
Deep Space Nine is so committed to long-running character beats, like character development, political intrigue with the Cardassians and the Bajorans and the Dominion, like these societal, cultural things that are happening around the station and around those characters. I think I think Deep Space Nine is the one that has the happiest balance and makes it a part of its own identity, and commits to it from beginning to end.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think they definitely commit to it. The writing is definitely there, but also just like you said, the premise of the show, right? They can't like just warp off and go to the next problem, put out the next fire. They're kind of stuck in it. So I would definitely agree with that.
It's the show that, especially if you cut it off at Discovery, pre-Discovery, because that is a modern show. So what I'm about to say, of course, like the newer stuff's gonna fit more. But of the TOS through Enterprise shows, I think Deep Space Nine is the one that you could like. Okay, here it is on Netflix for a modern person watching TV, the way people watch TV now, binging, old shows. That's the show that's going to be the most like bingeable.
Yeah. Well, that's how storytelling in TV shows are now.
Yes.
But even in Berman era, I feel like it was still more kind of one-off things. There wasn't as long.
There was a constant.
Yeah.
There was a constant resistance to going that way, even as TV by the end, like by the time Enterprise was on, I think with 24 and Lost was kind of premiering on the tail end of Enterprise. Like clearly the momentum was shifting toward serialized storytelling, more long-running, stories. But I think it was so early in that transition that a lot of things, Star Trek included, were kind of resistant to embracing it wholly. So there's constant like pushback, I think. And if you watch like behind the scenes stuff and you read interviews with people like Ron Moore and Brandon Bragg and people who are writing on these shows, I think there was a lot of desire within the writing room, writers' rooms, and on the writers' staffs to embrace those things and to commit and go with because Star Trek, like we were talking about at the beginning, it's so kind of foundational and it's so ripe for that stuff with continuity and because of the timeline element of it. It's so in the bones of the concept of the series as a whole, the whole Star Trek, that it's very tempting for writers to like want to use it. So there was constant push and pull, and I think Deep Space Nine is the one that kind of flew under the radar and got away with the most of it.
Yeah.
With more attention on TNG and then Voyager and Deep Space Nine kind of always being like sort of the stepchild that's flying under the radar. It got away with throwing hints out of the Dominion in early season 2 and not revealing them until the end of season 2 and slowly building that. And
Yeah.
things like that, I don't think you don't see that in the other shows,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion. Yeah. What we got here? A lot of comments.
Yeah, lots of.
Go with TNG. Cyber Honey says I'm going to go with TNG. There's a reason. They keep going back to these characters of Brian, Worf, become mainstays in Deep Space Nine as the best with continuity. There's some. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, there's some elements. There's a few series in Star Trek that I feel like you have to look for continuity. I think there's definitely continuity in TNG, and even there's continuity in Voyager, in pretty much every show. But I think it kind of tips the scale on more one-off things, at least in my mind. But yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there are some really good examples of continuity within the Next Generation. I think Picard's relationship with Q, there's some cool growing elements there. I think Worf with the
Klingon stuff, yeah.
The Klingon
The
background,
sun,
and
yeah.
being,
You're right.
Yeah. There are things, but they're subtle and they're not major elements that the show really leans on. They pull him out every so often. His relationship with his son Alexander, like there are things that are kind of returned to there as well. But I think the Next Generation commits more wholeheartedly to the episodic structure. But yeah, there are Q, Loxana Troy, Dan Troy, and a lot of characters that return later on in other shows. Is the Next Generation certainly a source of a lot of continuity, like a lot of the stuff that gets pulled back, in other shows, in the future stuff, and Deep Space Nine and Voyager is obviously all coming from the Next Generation. So there is a lot there. Lower Decks, obviously, even later on. Ian mentions it's hard to imagine watching Lower Decks without seeing everything else, and I would agree with that. That's something that I've long struggled with. I know people who put their friends in front of Lower Decks, and because it's a comedy and it's light and it's animated, it's an Adult Swim kind of concept. But I'm often like, I don't know, like, would somebody get that? Because the humor is so.
Same with Picard, I think.
Yeah,
it would be tough to maybe put. I mean, the stuff with Soji and well, but still, it's still built off this foundational kind of show. Right. That's tough.
I think the story is maybe accessible enough, like on its most basic level. Like, this is an older guy who's after his career, he's got a lot of mixed, like he's got a lot of bitterness, and they use flashbacks at the beginning of. Remember, a lot of those episodes like open with a flashback to something in the past. Like, I think they do enough to like make it accessible, but I Picard is another example. I think, of it's really hard to imagine getting a whole lot out of that without at least some appreciation for the Next Generation and who Picard was. I think the whole kind of emotional pull of that show is the change of that character, like knowing what he was on the bridge of the Enterprise D and the E, and seeing him now, and kind of seeing the fall from grace as far as not his own makeup. I think he's still the same guy and he's got the same values, but everything around him has changed. And what does that do to him? I think that's the whole kind of pull of that show. And but without that context, I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you haven't seen or
yeah,
maybe you have seen it, but not in a long time, or you haven't seen all the movies, right? I think you don't get it as much out of it,
right?
If you haven't seen it,
you kind of need Nemesis with Data, because that's such a huge element of that show. That's kind of the thing. I think maybe another discussion to have. I didn't quite answer the what do I think is the show that handles it the least well or the worst. Not sure. I don't know that any of them I would. A lot of people would say Voyager because of missed opportunities of some of the continuity elements there, but I've always kind of thought that there's kind of more there, and you have to do some legwork and some headcanon stuff to connect some dots and be willing to assume a lot of things are off screen, and be willing to accept that. But I I think Voyager has more there than meets the eye, and I'm satisfied more with some of the continuity elements of Voyager than many are. But there's certainly a conversation to be had. The way these new shows, as the franchise continues to grow and you get further and further away from the beginnings, and I think for obvious reasons, those earlier shows, the Next Generation, the original series, the continuity is just kind of like what came before it, and there's not that much that came before it. Like there's not as much of a canvas to play with. The further away you get, when you get
30
into
seasons to build off,
yeah, exactly, right. You get into 2017 and Discovery, you have 5 shows in the pipeline and 13 movies and 55 years of or 50 years of history to
draw
pull from.
Yeah,
you have all these they call them legacy characters now, and legacy moments, these things that are so kind of enticing to incorporate into your story because of the richness of the whole thing, that it becomes almost overwhelming to avoid it. So I think the new stuff is its own kind of animal, and
well, again, the landscape has changed.
Yes.
The new shows do definitely dive into the continuity a little bit more and weigh heavily on the show, but I think the landscape, that's the landscape of today's kind of culture and how we view things, like the binging, like you said, style of how people watch things is kind of just plays right into the hand of continuity. So I think a lot of people ask the question of which would you rather have? Would you have a more of a kind of one-off thing with little bits of continuity sprinkled in, i.e. maybe like a TNG or something like TOS or something like that, or would you have kind of the other end of the spectrum of the Deep Space Nine, more serialized, relying on continuity a little bit more, say, or even Discovery Season 1? I think it's really, really heavy. So yeah, it's just a interesting kind of question.
Yeah, I think the beauty of it for people like us who love it kind of wholly is that it's nice to have both. It's nice that there are shows that have kind of a vanilla and have a chocolate. You have more standalone-y, episodic structures where you really get the Swiss Army knife qualities of romantic comedy, and then drama, and then thriller, and then horror. Like, you get all that stuff, and that's easier to do in a episodic TNG kind of like structure, Voyager structure, original series structure. And then one of the things we always kind of talk about with Discovery and the newer stuff is I think they're finding a really cool way, and we've talked about it a lot. Season 3 I think really did a good job of incorporating that Swiss Army knife idea and finding ways to give these episodes unique qualities and to have them have their own vibes and aims at what kind of stories they're telling. But it's a more challenging thing to do. When I watch episodes of Deep Space Nine, even, or the original series or TNG, you get an occasional episode that you go, I just can't imagine how like these new shows would do this. Like, how would they ever do like the House of Quark? You're just never going to get that in a 13 episode, 14 episode, 15 episode season. In a structured A, B to C. You got to get from here to there in your story. Like you kind of lose that opportunity to tell these real one-offs and to really go off the beaten path on its own level. So I do miss that, but I do also recognize the current
landscape,
landscape of TV and what people want, and I find it satisfying, and I think it's important to constantly evolve and change and not be, stuck in your ways and doing things the way they were doing them in 1995 at the same time. I get it. And it's not like that stuff's not there. There's 750 some hours of those shows.
There always will be continuity.
Right. And for sure.
But I think again, this kind of go back to like, I think the premise and how the show is set up can kind of see where we're going to go with continuity, as far as level of because I think again, like we said, back to Deep Space Nine, the the premise and the start of that show is building off of this kind of continuity thing that happened before, like the occupation and things like that. So,
Wolf 359, even it is pulling from things that happened in the Next Generation.
Yeah, but I think there is also different types of, and not just story continuity and what had happened before, but also there's character continuity, right? That we've kind of seen, right. Not just in those shows, but continuity within characters and how they change and what had happened before. So it's not just a premise, right? There's other levels of continuity for sure.
You're absolutely right. I think the way that the character arcs are built, and the way that change is presented through the characters, like and when you ask like which show does it the best, I think Deep Space Nine does it the best because of the way that the character arcs are presented. I think watching Kira in Emissary and watching her in that last run of episodes where she's on Cardassia teaching the Cardassians to fight a resistance style, occupational, that journey that she takes is so well charted, and there are necessary beats along the way to see that change.
Ups, downs.
In the middle of the season, there's ups and downs. There's relationships that change with important characters, and the same thing with Odo, and like all those characters have real arcs that are clearly, presented, top to bottom, really all of them. Where I think that's made easier because of the nature of the structure of that show. Where in a show like The Next Generation or Voyager, because it's bouncing around so much, and the go ahead. I'm sorry.
You're right. You're right. But I think there's also some continuity elements that push back on that. I think I'm not taking away anything from the Kira character. I think she's got a great arc. Definitely ups and downs. Great. They do a great job too. But with the Doctor and Voyager, it's the same thing, right?
Oh yeah.
We definitely do get continuity elements there for sure. Sorry to interrupt you, but those are the things that I think in those shows you have to look for different levels of continuity, right? There's clearly Voyager will get knocked for not being as very serialized, and maybe we're kind of dancing around that. What's the difference between continuity and serialization? But the continuity of this character arc with the Doctor, I think, is definitely one of those things that an element of, hey, this Voyager has some continuity as well.
There definitely is, and I would defend Voyager to the hilt, because I think there are multiple characters that have real journeys and strong character arcs. But my dad's in the room and he mentioned Tom Paris for sure. 100%.
Oh yeah, big time.
I think he's got a great arc. I think the Doctor, like you said, I think 7 of 9 in her 4 seasons, there's a clear kind of journey that she's on. I think Janeway changes over the years, and the way she reacts to her crew, and the way she manages her command, and the way she sees the role of the captaincy is constantly evolving. It's there, but I think, like I was starting to say, I think the structure of Deep Space Nine makes it easier to.
That's true. You're right. Yeah.
Pull many characters that way. I think with the structure of the Next Generation and Voyager, and even Enterprise, because Enterprise got cut off before it really started to lean into those qualities of serialization and longer running character arcs and things like that. You get spottier results. You have these examples of Tom Paris and 7 and Doctor and Janeway, but then you also have Chakotay, and you have Harry Kim, and you have even maybe Tuvok, where there's maybe less of a definitive, like, ooh, I can see this. I can see this beginning, middle, and an end. Like, there are great moments along the way. All those characters have good stories and have good moments, and are I think effective characters. Your mileage may vary on some of them, but they're not. It's harder to, find the stories within the episodic structure that serve that character arc consistently,
as much as they do in Deep Space Nine and in the later shows especially. So you're
and
totally
I think
right.
because Deep Space Nine's in one place and things are coming to them, and they're constantly dealing with things that they're sitting in, and not just bouncing around. It's just easy. It's just there's just so much more opportunity there for there's a casualness to Deep Space Nine too. They're living on this thing. They're just kind of living casual life because of the nature of the way the show is set up. These guys work their shifts. They go to Quarks. They have a beer. They hang out. They go to the holosuite. They have like casual life is presented really as a major forefront. You think about like where does the action on Deep Space Nine take place? Like where do you see the characters the most often? The promenade. Quarks
on the station.
In their quarters, like and even on the like by the end of the show, like maybe not where you are right now, but it always kind of strikes me when I'm watching like first season, second season Deep Space Nine. There's a lot of stuff in Ops. By the end of the show, Ops isn't. You don't see Ops that often. Like they don't spend a whole lot of time there. You're in Sisko's office more often with Reese talking to somebody. You're in Quarks. You're on the promenade. You're in the hallways, watching people just kind of like walk around, do their thing, not like just sitting on the bridge or in Ops, plugging away at consoles. Mm-hmm. I think Deep Space Nine has the structure to allow for that character-based continuity to really sing. But real quick, I would just say, I mean, I've gone on this spiel many times, but I think Voyager does have a lot of good stuff. I think that the Janeway Chakotay stuff is juicier, meatier than I think many people give it credit for. I think you have to do some of the work yourself, and you have to assume some things happen off screen, and you have to assume things are going on in their heads. Mm-hmm. But I think, there are clear drives that both of them have, and differing viewpoints on what they would be willing to settle for. I think Chakotay's more kind of along for the ride and sees the value of being together, and if it takes forever, it takes forever. Janeway's more obviously driven by get home, and I think those kind of values put them in different positions when they get to points like Scorpion, and they have this dilemma in front of them about which way do we do this? Do we try to push forward at all costs, or do we kind of loop around and make it take longer? Chakotay is always going to err on the side of, well, if it takes longer, it takes longer. And I think there's an obvious comfort level that he has with the dynamic as is that's different than Janeway's, and I think part of that is his interest in Janeway and what he'd be willing to do, and Janeway's obviously in a completely different headspace. So there are these meatier things that are there if you're willing to bite and chew on them yourself. They're not presented on the forefront the way Deep Space Nine would. And then, like, you mentioned the Doctor. I love the arc of, like, Kes in the early seasons teaching the Doctor to be a person and to teach him those values and how to be a friend and how to be a fully functional person. And then Kes leaves, and the Doctor kind of picks up that baton and teaches Seven those same lessons. I love that journey that you see. So there's continuity in Voyager. I think it's an underrated element. It's not as focused on it as Deep Space Nine is, but it's there if you want to see it.
Is there a certain beauty underlying continuity in Star Trek? Like I feel like we've mentioned it on here, obviously, how much we do love Deep Space Nine and how the continuity is on the forefront and things like that, especially in the new shows. But is there an element of beauty and sometimes you miss that subtleness? Like I feel like you can never be happy and content with because I feel like some of the knocks that I give the Berman era is, wow, I wish there was more continuity. And now with this continuity machine that we have with Discovery, am I constantly wishing, well, man, I wish we had these underlying things, these one-off stories that had a little bit of continuity sprinkled in, and now we're getting and now we're gonna get that. So I think it's just a kind of a fun back and forth thing that I see the kind of fandom kind of go through. So
yeah, for sure, I think that's a natural thing, and I can speak as somebody who lived through that era and watched the shows as they premiered in like the late Voyager Enterprise. People were starved for that continuity, and they wanted that so bad. And now you see the exact opposite. You watch Discovery, and one of the things you see people complain about is I kind of miss the one-off.
Now we get Strange New Worlds. Stories.
Yeah, and now Strange New Worlds is going to come along and do it, and people will probably complain that it's not, doesn't take enough advantage of the opportunities.
Continuity.
Yeah. So you can't win, and the beauty is that, in my opinion, the Star Trek does it all. Like it has it all, and it's different iterations, and that they're not all one note. That each show has its own unique personality. Go ahead.
With that being said, like I kind of want to reword that question of I asked what's the best, what does it the best, and what does it the worst, because I think even there's beauty in the worst.
Yeah.
So I should have maybe reworded that question a little bit better, because I find a certain beauty, and I like to be able to, especially with Voyager, to be able to do that legwork. I want to put it under the microscope and be able to look for things like that and bring in my headcanon, bring in we haven't really talked about it, but the literary stuff into my kind of headspace and continuity, Star Trek continuity. So yeah.
Right. There's a lot of desire for all of that for sure out there. E.R. Mixon's Crazy Theories talks about several definable loose story arcs in Voyager. The Kazon arc in season 2, I completely agree. I just listened to the Multipliers, the stuff that runs from Seska leaving the ship and becoming a part of the Kazon crew, and episodes like Maneuvers and the whole arc with the traitor on the Voyager, Jonas, and like there's a lot going on there with serialization in the early part of Voyager with Kazon. The Hirogen stuff that's very connected. They give a piece of technology to the Hirogen in season 4, and they get bit in the butt in season 7 as a result of that decision. And then the Borg, obviously, with 7, and the Borg Queen and her kind of obsession with getting 7 back, and like there's it's there. I think I've always kind of taken the position that the kind of completely comparing Deep Space Nine and Voyager and saying Deep Space Nine's 100, Voyager's a 0 when it comes to these things is kind of a lazy argument. Yeah. Like it's just kind of that's not true. I think there's a definite case to be made that they are very different and they handle it differently, and that there are missed opportunities on both sides, I think, to some degree, with their approaches. But especially with Voyager, I think there are things like an Equinox when they take those crewmen on the ship. The fact that you never see those crewmen again, like,
or even the Maquis earlier in the earlier
or the
seasons.
Maquis stuff, of course, right. There are things that Deep Space Nine would have done differently. That writing staff would have done differently if they had control of the show.
Yeah.
And I've always been, hungry for some of those things. But to say that Voyager doesn't have it, or that Voyager's not successful because it doesn't do those things, I can't go along with that. I don't agree.
You're right.
Cyber Honey asks an interesting question, I guess, because we were talking about Janeway Chakotay. Which of these three is best? Can't choose. Cisco Kira, Janeway Chakotay, Archer T'Pol, kind of the three recent Berman show captain first officer relationships. It's an interesting question because they all have their kind of interesting, unique elements. I love them all.
There's one that this left off this list that there's definitely some continuity there as well in TNG.
Picard and Riker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a love interest, so to speak, but their relationship is definitely
and I would
an interesting one.
Cisco Kira, I don't think there's an ounce of romance there.
Yeah.
Archer T'Pol, they play a little bit with it at the beginning. I've long said, Archer to go with Enterprise real quick because we haven't really talked about it. Archer and T'Pol's relationship is maybe my favorite thing about Enterprise. When I think about why I love Enterprise, I like the evolving relationship of the humans and the Vulcans as presented through the evolving relationship of Archer and T'Pol. Like their connection, their ability to overcome each other's prejudices about each other, and to become a cohesive unit, and to embrace the difference of each other and become a better whole. That is Star Trek to me. That is like the beginnings of the Federation coming together. That is the beginnings of Star Trek. That's like that's where the premise of the show is is achieved. I think through that microscopic look at that idea, the Vulcans and the humans coming together and figuring out a way to work together is so foundational to that show, and I think it works as a foundational element of the continuity, the whole timeline of it. I love that. But all the Janeway Chakotay stuff, the difference in those two characters and their growing relationship and evolving dynamic, I love that stuff. I think that's really underrated. Cisco Kira, the obvious, Cisco being the emissary and the way Kira's kind of wanting to embrace that but needing a distance. Like I love those.
The because they kind of dance with it in the show. Like, dude, how do I keep it professional with working with a religious figure, in my beliefs? I think they do a great job with that. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody who I see in two different lights. He's the captain, but he's also, the
emissary
of the prophets. Like that. I love when they explore Kira's dilemma with how to work with Sisko.
Yeah.
And you just watched an episode, Starship Down, that does that a lot.
That's like it's like an A or a B C plot, which I love. Yeah.
Yeah, and they come back to it here and there, and I really appreciate when they do. Mm-hmm. And to just put a button on Enterprise as a whole, that Enterprise is certainly like a unique animal because it constantly kind of reinvents itself. First two seasons, I think, are very similar to like the Next Generation and Voyager, probably more like that, with the real emphasis on the more standalone episodic stories. There is a little bit of running character
arc
development
for sure. There's some continuity,
but it's more subtle.
It's very subtle.
It's more recognizably TNG and Voyager than Deep Space Nine, I think, in the first two seasons. Season 3, they completely
turn that on its head. Yeah,
they turn into 24 and have a singular thing that starts and ends kind of within a season.
Yeah,
and it becomes much more Deep Space Nine like, I think, like season 6, season 7 Deep Space Nine, mm-hmm. with clear conflict that has to get resolved this season. And then season 4, I think they kind of find the mix of bouncing around with these mini arcs, but also having like this overrunning arc of continuing to work toward the Federation baby steps and growing the relationship with other important role players in the dynamic, the Andorians and the Tellarians and the Vulcans and Klingons, even
ahead of
like
its time.
Are involved.
Yeah,
right. I think Enterprise is a whole unique animal with the way it changes and the way it reinvents itself in the way that it sees continuity and uses it. We want to call it there? We're over an hour.
I think so. Yeah, I think we call it there.
Yeah, this is a conversation that could go on forever. You could certainly. I think we could fill an hour with just talking continuity about each individual series if you wanted to. We could
do it
just kind of
an era too.
Different the Berman era.
We didn't really talk about the Kelvin timeline really with continuity as well.
True. Yeah.
So yeah, I think there'll definitely be a part 2 or 3 for sure with this.
Yeah, we'll double back and continue this conversation because it was a lot of fun. I think I love getting into these conversations that allows us to touch on each show and kind of look at the franchise as kind of like a big whole thing, mm-hmm. as opposed to just one little sliver of it from one show. Really enjoyed it, and I think there was a lot of good input from the chat that I really appreciate. A lot of people chiming in and kind of steering the conversation, which is what we love.
Real quick, I think just one more point that I want to make. I think Star Trek as a whole definitely made an impact on science fiction. I think what we're seeing with Star Wars in particular, they're building off continuity, and now they're doing these one-off TV shows that are putting things under the microscope, telling these one-off things, building off the continuity that has come before it. So, and I feel like Star Trek is to blame for that, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. I think other shows and other franchises need to take notes, which they have, even Marvel and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
So,
yeah, I think the MCU is definitely kind of getting into that territory where they have so much continuity and they're kind of walking that same tightrope about how much of it to embrace and how much of it not to, and what's too much. I think one of the things that a lot of conversation, I haven't seen it because I'm not totally up to speed on the MCU, is WandaVision is a huge deal in pop culture right now. A lot of people are watching that, and one of the things I hear from people on is if you're not totally into the MCU, if you're not like up to speed and you haven't seen it, it can be really confusing. You don't have the whole picture. So I think that's an example of there's a show that a lot of people want to see, and it's a big deal, and some people are struggling with it because you just don't have the context if you haven't like lived in this universe, and that's the kind of thing I think Star Trek's constantly kind of reckoning with as well. There was some talk earlier on about like Lower Decks, like, and we kind of touched on it, like putting somebody in front of Lower Decks. I think there are a lot of people, like if you put a Star Trek fan next to a non-Star Trek fan in front of Lower Decks, you'd have one person who's like really laughing at it and somebody who's kind of like,
what's going on?
I don't get it. You're like, it's not in on the joke. And that's the challenge. And it's going to continue to be the challenge. And one of the things like the MCU and now Star Trek for sure, Star Trek before it, is the more of it there is, and the more of a canvas you have to play with and reach back to, the more tempting it is, and the more complicated it is, and the more challenging a task it is to like take advantage of it in a way that isn't off-putting to people that are intimidated by, I have to watch 800 hours to like get up to speed so I can enjoy this little half-hour comedy sketch, like adult comedy, cartoon.
Is that their goal?
That's tough.
At the end of the day, hey, we want you to watch more Trek.
if I kind of like with the Kelvin timeline, if it achieves that, if it makes people go, I like this, but I kind of want to get it more, and it forces them to go back, and
I am a product of that. I am.
Yeah. It worked. You're one of many.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Sorry.
No. This is a really fun conversation. I really thank you to everybody in the chat for kind of contributing and making it a group effort to kind of tackle this. There's more to cover. We didn't even come close to touching it all. This is an ongoing conversation for sure. We'll have to double back and maybe compartmentalize a little bit more and look at the continuity conversation in more targeted ways to continue on.
Yeah. Again, real quick before we sign off, next weekend we're going to be doing a Trek After Dark. I'll let Bill explain kind of how that's going to work, but yeah, definitely we'll be back next week with some more great Star Trek content along with Trek After Dark. So
Trek After Dark is a Discord based, if you're a Discord user, video if you want to, audio if you want to, if you just want to chat like with keyboard and mouse and behind your monitor without being on, you can do that too. It's like a group call where everybody who's on the server that wants to participate just kind of hangs out. We watch episodes as a group. We play trivia. We just kind of casually hang out and talk about life, and it's a really cool time. We've done it quite a few times now for the last few years, and try to do it every couple months. If you're interested in something like that, you can DM me on Twitter if you're not already in the Discord server for us. I can get you set up and get you an invitation to get yourself in a position to participate in something like that. But again, it's a really casual hangout. If you're comfortable being on video, you can do the whole shebang, be on video chat and interact that way. But if you're not, or if you don't have the means, you can join the call and just kind of
could be on your phone too.
Watch and listen. And it works on your phone. It's a mobile app or it's a computer app, whatever you have. But it's a really cool way to get to know other fans in a more personal, like relaxed kind of a way. And it'll be on Saturday, a week from yesterday at probably around 6:00 Eastern time is usually when we start.
When we start, yeah.
Yeah, but that's open to debate, and that may change. So keep an eye on Twitter, and if you're in the Discord server, certainly on the chat there.
Yeah.
Get all that situated.
Yeah. That being said, thank you guys for watching. We'll be back next week for some great Star Trek content.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.